The second type of brush you can create and use in Illustrator is called scatter brush. Now, once again, for this, if you go into the brushes panel and under the library, you will be able to find a set called decorative scatter. These are probably the best examples to begin with, just to see how these type of brushes work. And one of them that I like to use sometimes is this one called bubbles. If I select that one and use the brush tool, I can start drawing with these bubbles. And you can see it's going to scatter them around, randomizing their rotation, their color, and the spacing between each of the elements. Now, when I go into the brushes panel and double click on this brush, which was added to the library, I will be able to also make additional changes. So there's a lot of things I can control here, even including size. So as an example, if I set the size to random, then I get two values, and I can decide what should be the minimum size. And you see already in the background is changing. Let's say that is going to be my minimum size, and the maximum size I want even bigger. So now we have a variety between 57% to 316%. And because it's set to random, it's automatically going to vary the size. If you have a pen tablet, a Wacom tablet, you can also make use of the pressure. So if you set the size to be controlled by the pressure, then the harder you press, the bigger these bubbles will be. So if I click OK, I apply the changes to the strokes, but I'm going to delete them, and I draw a new one, a new set. So I'm just going to draw gently, then press harder, then draw gently again. You can see the difference as it's changing its size. One thing that you can notice already is that with scatter brushes, you won't see a live view. Like with the calligraphy brush, we could see it straight away while we were drawing. With this brush, because it's usually quite complex, you have to wait a bit. So when you let go the mouse or the pen from the tablet, that's when it's going to appear. So that's when it generates the actual final view of your brush. Now let's try to set up a custom scatter brush. So I'm going to delete this one here, and notice that I have a couple of trees here that I designed, and these are the ones that I'm going to use for my scatter brush. First, I'm just going to pick one of them, and the way you can save a new element as a brush is just simply by drag and dropping it onto your brushes panel. That's all you need to do. And then of course you need to decide what type of brush you want. You will see that when you just drag and drop a complex shape, it won't allow you to turn that into a calligraphic or bristle brush, so you will only have three options. But for now I'm going to use scatter brush, and I click OK. Now by default it's going to just come with the most generic options, and I'm going to keep it at that. I'll click OK. So that is already created here, that brush. If I select the brush tool and have that custom brush selected, I can already start drawing with it. Now at the moment it's not that interesting because it just keeps drawing the same trees in the same distance as well. So nothing fancy at the moment. But let me just delete this other line and keep this one here as a reference. And then I go back and double click on the brush itself. Notice that I have the preview option turned on at the bottom, which means that if I make changes like to the size, then automatically it updates there as well. I will change this again to random, the size, and I will randomize it between the values I feel like is going to work for the brush. So there's probably the smallest on the left and the biggest on the right. Maybe it can be all slightly smaller, something like that. Looks quite good. Now we can also change the spacing to random, and that way we can have some that's closer to each other and then maybe a little bit more between some of them. That already starting to look a little bit more randomized. Then we can of course add some scattering as well. Now scattering you have to be careful with. So normally I keep these values quite close, but of course again here I use random. So for scattering I use random as well. I am going to set it to 50% and then maybe around down to minus 10%. So not much scattering, but still there is a bit of it. And then here's a very useful option called rotation relative to page, or you can set that to path. Now, if it's set to path, you can see already that it's following the curve that I created, while if it's set back to page, it is going to always be vertical, as far as you don't change the rotation. So of course you can change the rotation as well manually, and you can even set rotation to follow the pen pressure, or it can also be set to random. And I like to add a very subtle rotation in both angles, so between 3 degrees to -3 degrees, something like that, or maybe even just -2 and 2 degrees, just to have a very subtle angle that can be randomized. Also, we have a colorization option here, but I will come back to this after we tried our brush. So I will just click OK, and I apply the changes to my current strokes. That's usually the question when you make updates to the brush. It wants you to decide whether you want to update your previous brush strokes or leave them as they were and start using the new settings on new brush strokes. So you have the option for both. I usually click on applies to strokes, and then now I can continue drawing with the brush tool, and you can see how quickly I can build up a little forest here. If I want it to be a bit thicker in the middle, I can, and then I can have some scattered around here. Now the only problem with this, as you can see, is that we only have one single tree type. While here I created a bit of variety, changing the colors and also the shape. Now you have a couple of options again. You can create multiple scatter brushes for each of these shapes, or you can include all 3 in one scatter brush. So let me delete these for now, and I'm going to select these trees now, put them in a slightly random placement next to each other, and then start copying a few more, just to again have a little bit of randomness, also in size among them, have a bit of variety. Now I select all of this together and drag and drop it into my brushes panel. Choose scatter brush, I click OK, and first I'm just going to again click OK on this. Let me move these to the side and select the brush tool and start drawing. Now that's already a little bit more randomized, but once again we can put to use all the settings that we have. So if I double click on this brush, I can change the size to random and then control it again. So probably smaller will work better, something like that, just a bit of randomness. Spacing can be again set to random. Let's try to keep them close to each other. So we want to build a thicker forest, but not too thick, of course. Yeah, something like that looks quite good. Then we can also add a bit of scatter. So going up and down slightly. Yeah, that might be a little bit too much. Yeah, that's good. And then once again, rotation I set to random, and we add a subtle rotation in both directions, just like that. And that's probably going to work quite nicely. So we can click OK and apply to strokes the changes that we've done. But I'm going to actually delete these and start painting fresh. So I have the brush selected and I can start adding the trees in. Now, when I feel like I need to add a few of the other ones, I just select that, and some odd ones I can always add in. So have a little bit of variety, that helps as well. So you can see when you have multiple brushes, you will be able to achieve really good result with a little bit of playing around with the settings. And there's 2 more things I wanted to show you. One is that with the stroke size, you can actually control how big the shapes will be. So let me show you. This is going to be 1 point. Then I'm going to reduce it down to 0.5. And then I reduce it down to 0.25. So you can always make amends without actually changing the settings, just by updating the stroke size, how big you want each of your brush strokes to be. Another important option is the color. If you pick a different color, let's say purple, and you draw, that doesn't affect your shapes by default. But if you go into the settings on the brush itself, so I double click on that and change the colorization method to tints, for example, and I click OK. So now on the new one, you can see immediately that my settings are applied. So the color I picked is now blended into the brush strokes. So this is really all you need to know about scatter brushes, and feel free to experiment with these settings and come up with your own custom brush ideas.